Hello and welcome to this ABC News special looking at the representation and power of women in Australian politics. I'm Patricia Karvelas and it's great to have your company. As we edge closer to the federal election this year, the nation is still grappling with the demands of a third wave movement of women. In the wake of revelations of a toxic environment for women in Parliament and sadly way beyond, there are calls for massive changes to policy to address the demands of women. So, as we celebrate the achievements of women on this International Women's Day, why is it that our own Parliament is still so behind when it comes to gender equity? In a moment, you'll be joined by a political panel of federal politicians representing Labor, the Coalition and the Greens, looking at where we're at and what considerable work is still left to be done. And then Walkley Award-winning journalists Samantha Maiden and Catherine Murphy join you to analyse where we're going as Australia gets ready to vote once again. But first, ABC News has crunched the numbers, looking at the history of women's participation and representation in Parliament. The story today too. So how far have we really come to achieving gender equality? Let's bring in ABC political reporter Jane Norman to explain it all. Welcome, Jane. Give us a sense of the history here. What is the history of the representation of women in our Parliament?
Well, Patricia, Australia was actually the first country in the world to give most women the right to vote and to stand for Parliament. But on the latter, progress has been painfully slow. For the first 4 decades of federation, women made up a grand total of 0% of the Australian Parliament until 1943, when Enid Lyons became the first woman to be elected to the lower house and Dorothy Tangney, the first woman to take a seat in the Senate. From there, representation in the House of Representatives grew extremely slowly. It wasn't for another 5 decades until 1996 before more than 10% of the seats were occupied by women. Today, that figure's just over 30%. The Senate has consistently done better for female representation. It hit 10% in the early 80s before reaching over 50% for the first time at the last election. Now, much of that success can be attributed to Labor. It has forced change. Since the 1990s, the party's used quotas to boost the number of women in its ranks. Now, it's on the verge of achieving 50-50 representation. The Coalition, meanwhile, is deeply resistant to the Q word, and today, just over a quarter of its MPs and senators are women.
And Jane, how does Australia look compared to the rest of the world? And what are other countries doing differently?
Well, Australia's Parliament has seen gradual improvement, but it's been slower than many other countries. The Inter-Parliamentary Union gathers regular stats on the share of women in parliaments, and they rank countries based on lower house representation. In the year 2000, at the turn of the millennium, Australia was ranked 20th in the world. But over the past 2 decades, we've slipped steadily down the league table to 57th. Top of the world at the moment, and they've actually been there for some time, is Rwanda, the first country with a female majority in Parliament. 61% of its lower house MPs are women. Its success can be traced back to constitutional changes made in the wake of the genocide. The country was forced to elevate the role of women and mandated that seats in Parliament be reserved for them. Rounding out the top 5 countries for female representation: Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico and the United Arab Emirates. But just a note of caution there, counting seats isn't always a measure of the power of women sitting in them. In some places, parliaments are only a puppet to presidents, monarchs, emirs and dictators. No such trouble with comparisons across the ditch though. New Zealand is almost perfectly poised for equality. And there, as in many other countries, parity was no accident. Targets and quotas helped women leap democracy's gender pitfalls. It's not that women couldn't get there without some rules to support them, Patricia, just that those rules might propel them a little faster.
So now that we know where we're at, what do a few of the key women in Parliament think needs to be done to address both representation levels and key policy issues. Joining you, Susan Lee, Environment Minister and a member of the recently established Women's Cabinet Task Force. Senator Katie Gallagher, who's Labor's finance spokeswoman and former ACT Chief Minister, and Senator Mehreen Faruqi, Greens education spokeswoman. Welcome to all of you. And I'm going to begin with you, Minister Lee. Much of the success Labor appears to have achieved that has led to it being really on the cusp of delivering gender parity in the parliament is because it used quotas to boost the numbers of women in its ranks. Do you think they may also help your side of politics?
I've always said, Patricia, that quotas have a role to play. And I've also said that I'll take that recommendation to my state party division. It's a decision that would be made by the party itself because it's about females in the Liberal Party and not a decision to be made by individual members. However, I almost feel that the tide has gone beyond that with the things and the events that have happened this year. And I also want to make this point. It's not just about quotas in the parliament. It's about quotas out there in rural and regional Australia. We're 50% plus on government boards, but we need female representation across the board where we don't have it now. So I want to see this tackled on many fronts. I don't just want to focus on what's inside the building. I'm a rural and regional MP. Right now I'm in Mildura, where there are so many issues that are peculiar to rural and remote women that I also want to bring forward.
So when we look at that figure, Minister, just over 30% of the lower house having women members, a lot of it is attributable, that lower number, to your side of politics. Does it frustrate you?
Sometimes it does. And if somebody asks me, have you got enough women here or here? My answer is always not enough, whatever forum I'm sitting in. So, of course, we haven't got enough. But I don't want to decry the contributions of strong men or people from diverse backgrounds that are not necessarily related to gender. But I do want to see more women. I've been in Parliament a long time, as you know, and I can say that over 20 years, the journey for us has been a positive one. And when I see the role of the parliamentary institutions, the change that has been made this year through Respect at Work, the roadmap to respect, through all of the upheaval that we've seen, all of that plays to a really positive environment for women, more so than it was before. So I want to celebrate that on International Women's Day too, and remind the people out there in the community that we're there for them. We're not just there for ourselves, we're there for them.
Katie Gallagher, yes, your party is on the verge of achieving that 50-50 representation. But I'm going to be blunt here. In some of those key roles, opposition leader, deputy leader, there are still men. What does that say about how difficult this is, or the internal culture?
Hi, PK, and thanks for being with you all and sharing a great panel. Look, there's always more work to be done. Labor has been clear, for the last, it's almost 30 years now, about accelerating and supporting women to get into those key roles, to get into Parliament and more broadly across the community. It's one of the reasons I got involved in politics was there was no women in the Labor Party locally when I first stood for election, and there was many women that were outraged at that, and we've changed that over time. We're at almost 50% now, which is a great result across the federal parliament, and I think the shadow cabinet is almost at 50% too, and of course we've had the first female Prime Minister proudly from the Labor Party as well. So there's always more work to be done, but I think Labor's got a really strong record, and there's no doubt with women like Tanya and Penny and Christina and Michelle Rowland, all of that sitting around the cabinet table. Women's views and attitudes and representation is well met.
Senator Faruqi, the Greens talk a lot about gender equality, but even in your party, it is most often men who have been leaders. That's with the exception, of course, of Christine Milne, who was Greens leader. What's your analysis of why this even happens on your side, on the progressive side of politics?
Hi, PK, and hello, everyone. Well, we know that women's rights are always hard fought for, and they probably will be for a while. But listen, I'm very proud to be part of a party that has 60% women in Parliament, and half of those women are black and brown women. And I think that's an issue that isn't discussed too much. I mean, I was surprised when I found out that I was the first ever Muslim woman in any parliament in Australia, and that was 2013. That is absolutely shocking that we live in this amazing multicultural country with people from everywhere around the world, and we don't have close to any representation of that people in our parliament. And the Liberal government's women's cabinet task force, I was having a look at it, and that has more men in it than women of colour. So I think there is a lot to be changed with respect to women, but there is a lot to be changed with respect to the diversity of people and women that are represented in Parliament.
Yeah, Susan Lee, I think that is an interesting conversation that we're having, those intersectional conversations. It's not just about white women, it's about actually addressing diversity more broadly in our country. What is your thinking about the way your side of politics, the Conservative side, needs to sort of tackle this issue?
It depends who puts themselves forward. So what we have to do is encourage more women from diverse backgrounds, more people from diverse backgrounds to put themselves forward. And if I was making a political remark, which I don't really want to do because I love the collegiate nature of these conversations, there is a notable woman from a diverse background in Western Sydney who's being pushed out by Christina Keneally at the next election. And I think I have to call that out. And I don't mind when similar things are called out across the spectrum. But I'm glad Maureen mentioned the Women's Task Force because we have some, really strong women sitting at that table. Marise Payne, Senator Anne Ruston, Jane Hume, who represents women's economic security. I represent Marise Payne in the lower house. I'm there and I've been able to bring my particular passion to that table, which is the specialist capability in our domestic violence courts that mean when women are victims of sexual assault or indeed any form of violence, that they get the wraparound treatment within our court system that they deserve. I use that as an example, but all of the women at that table are bringing forward, really powerful voices. Childcare from Jane Hume, international women from Marise Payne, and regional women from Bridget McKenzie. We've never had this grouping before at the cabinet table. It's very, very powerful.
And where is the change? When are we going to see the kind of tangible consequences of this grouping? Because there's been this long list of changes that a very powerful group of women who have become household names would like to see in our country. I'm talking Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins, Christine Holgate, Lucy Turnbull. Universal childcare, they are calling for all of the recommendations of Kate Jenkins' report to be implemented, including employers having this positive duty on them, Susan Lee, to take action on sexual harassment in the workplace. When are we going to see all of that enacted?
Well, it's all happening. I mean, 42 of the 55, I think, recommendations have either been funded or implemented. Some of them involve state governments. So if you're going to do them properly and demonstrate that you care, you have to bring everyone that has a role in that decision around the table. We saw a $1.9 billion economic security package coming out of the Women's Cabinet. A lot of that is centred on childcare. From today, I think 82,000 women will immediately be $2,600 a year better off. And I can actually run those numbers through a whole range of different income groups, and as a previous childcare minister I know how much that matters. And the flexibility that women have to move between the jobs that they want and have secure income and superannuation in their retirement. I mean, I'm seeing things come out of that group all the time. And look, with respect to Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame, both of them are force for nature, incredibly amazing women who have led so much of what we've seen across the country. I want to pay tribute to them, and I want to once again say to the women out there who see us in a very spoilt workplace in some respects with the conditions we have and the access we have, that we want to be their voices too.
Katie Gallagher, would Labor enact this long list of demands that have been articulated by this wide group of women?
Look, again, certainly when I've had a look at it this morning, I mean, incredibly talented women putting forward a united voice. Of course, Labor would look at all of it. We've said that we would implement the Respect at Work report in its entirety, so we would pick up the bits that the Morrison government have ignored. But the job in government, if we were fortunate to get there, is much bigger. I mean, there's so many issues affecting women, young women, older women, women from diverse backgrounds, childcare, housing, domestic violence, balance, superannuation, income security, cost of living. These are all issues that predominantly affect or disproportionately affect women. Aged care workers, the care economy. I mean, these are massive challenges facing our country. We need a government that isn't going to sit around for 10 years and pat them on the head and then all of a sudden before the election go, oh, there's all these things we want to do. We need a government that's prepared to tackle them all, and I can assure you that an Albanese government would do just that.
Maureen Faruqi, I know you've been critical of the way the government's handled some of these issues, but Senator, do you think there is genuine change afoot? We've heard from the minister there that she actually, thinks that quotas need to be looked at. She wants to push for that there's a women's committee of cabinet looking at these issues. Are we on the cusp of something which is genuine change?
I mean, if I'm really honest, there is a lot of talk, there is a lot of lip service, and there is a lot of tinkering around the edges. And that's not how you change these entrenched systems of sexism and misogyny and patriarchy that have translated into such a disproportionate impact on women and on the gender inequality that we see at the moment. I think the list that the women have come out today is an incredible list to actually look at those systems that need to be changed. And there are things that the Greens, some of them we have been campaigning on for years. Just yesterday, I launched our Greens policy on universal and free childcare. We know that women are held back from what they want to do, whether it's study or work, because they just can't get accessible childcare. So what I think is, PK, that women are sick and tired of talk. And I see this anger and energy out there in women, which says that we are tired of chipping away at this wall of white privilege and patriarchy. It's time to bulldoze that wall down and make these changes that will actually have an impact. I mean, if we are serious that we want to prevent violence against women, that we want pay equality, then we have to talk about expanded, paid parental leave. Then we have to talk about higher pay for caring work which is feminized at the moment. We have to talk about free childcare. We have to talk about a home for all. And we have to invest in it, not talk. The time for talk is over. And we, in the balance of power, hopefully after we've got rid of this Liberal government, will make sure that we push the next government to make these changes.
Susan Lee, there was a candidate for Prime Minister who was female on your side of politics. Her name was Julie Bishop. She's no longer in the Parliament. I look now at your front bench and I can't, unless you're going to put your hand up here on the panel, and I'd love to break that story, I can't see the emerging future Conservative female Prime Minister on the Liberal side. Why can't I see her?
Well, I don't know, PK, but what I do know is that you can make a difference in the Parliament wherever you sit. You don't have to be on the front bench to make a difference. You can make a difference as somebody who's just arrived. We've seen that this year with some really strong women on our side. You can never choose to be a minister, even though you've been offered that position, and you can contribute. And having been in many different positions, I know that from personal experience. So I want to see strong women across the Parliament, of course, in our party, but I don't want it all to be about just climbing a ladder to the top, because
but the top matters, doesn't it? The top is where the power is.
The top matters, and of course, we want to have Prime Ministers and leaders who understand and connect with women. And what I've seen in the Parliament this year from Scott Morrison is a radical change in culture and approach. We can't do it all on our own. Culture and change takes time and takes commitment from a whole range of different people across the spectrum, both inside and outside the Parliament. But, I'm proud that the changes that we've brought about as a result of Kate Jenkins' report, as a result of many other things, and we've really put our money where our mouth is. We've really invested in the changes that will make a difference to women. Tax cuts, childcare, superannuation for older women. And I see so many in rural Australia who have a lack of income in their later years. Rural and regional women who get so easily forgotten. But because most people in Australia live close to the coast, we're here punching for them.
Katie Gallagher, final word to you on this panel. And it has been a really interesting panel, but yes, you're right. Labor has delivered one female Prime Minister. She was treated pretty shabbily, I would think most people would agree. It was a terrible time in politics and a really, really fractious time. Will Labor deliver a second potential leader for the country who's a woman, and when will that be?
I have no doubt that there will be future female Labor Prime Ministers. I look at the talent that sits around our shadow cabinet table, and there's so many of them. Seriously, so many. We've got 50% of women represented across that shadow cabinet. Absolutely, there will be. And we've had a proud record of 50% of Labor's leadership team are female. Our Senate leader, of course, is female. Like, we are strong, powerful voices within that our caucus. And yes, there'll be plenty of them. New, emerging young women coming up through the ranks. There's going to be plenty of them, and I look forward to supporting them on their journey.
Thank you to the three of you. It's been a really great conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
In many ways, 2021 was the year politics changed when it came to women. Joining me is news.com.au's political editor Samantha Maiden and The Guardian's political editor Catherine Murphy, both of them Walkley Award winners and experts in this area particularly. Now, Sam, what changed last year? Yes, the Brittany Higgins allegations, which you broke, were in many ways the beginning of this, but now it seems a bigger movement has started. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think the most fascinating thing is it was a movement that was well and truly driven by women. I would call them readers in the case of, people that obviously read that story, but it was women across the board. And so Brittany Higgins obviously became a bit of a lightning rod for these issues, which, has its burdens, I think, as well. And I think there's a big debate to be had in Australia about the pressure and the burden that we put on women who come forward with these sort of allegations, whether it's Grace Tame or other women that have come forward, because it can be very traumatising for them. They inspire people, they have triggered people to go into action, but it's very difficult for those women. And I suppose that's a question for the years ahead, is that how do you achieve change in this space without putting so much pressure on women to tell their own personal stories? They can be very powerful, but I think sometimes we underestimate the impact on those women of telling those stories.
Yeah, I think that's right. Catherine, this movement, which has reignited very much this week and today on International Women's Day, how is that movement affecting debates around the role of women in politics on issues around representation and gender parity?
I think what happened last year was like nothing, certainly nothing that I've seen in this building in terms of the impact, and it rippled right through politics and, as Sam says, beyond into the community. That was sort of the really interesting thing about it, was that it sort of erupted in the People's House and basically cascaded into the community, and that discussion is persisting until this day. Now, what has it done practically, Patricia, which was your question in terms of diversity and representation? Well, that's a slow burn, isn't it? Obviously, we need our parliament to be more diverse. The Labor Party has had a better record than the coalition in relation to that diversity, although when the diversity conversation started in Labor politics, it certainly wasn't a matter of men saying, oh yes, ladies, thanks for turning up, we'll clear the way, here's all the great positions for you. Obviously, that conversation in Labor has played out really in the 20 years I've been in journalism. The Liberal Party sort of keeps stepping up to this debate, thinking that quotas might be an idea, or thinking that something else other than the status quo might be effective, but then stepping back from that. So again, there's the issue of representative diversity in the parliament in terms of parity, men and women representing equally in the Australian Parliament, but then there's also inclusivity, which has been, which is a very important element of this debate, which has not been front and centre over the last 12 months. Women of colour, women from different ethnic backgrounds. There's a whole frontier here, Patricia.
Yeah, the debate is much deeper. Look, Sam, there is some shift, though, in the coalition. We just had Susan Lee, the minister who's also on the Women's Cabinet Subcommittee, join us for the political panel component of our show tonight, and she made it clear that she wants to keep pushing for quotas, that she thinks something has to change. Is there that kind of appetite now on the Conservative side of politics?
Well, very early on in this debate, when Brittany Higgins' allegations first emerged, the Prime Minister, you will recall, actually held a press conference suggesting that he was in favour of perhaps introducing quotas in some form, and that was something that he would like to see prosecuted. Well, we haven't seen any evidence of that happening, which perhaps goes more to his lack of control over parties, and we've seen that play out recently with the New South Wales Liberal Party. But despite, you know, what he stated intention in a press conference, that hasn't actually occurred. I think the positive thing is that people are talking about these issues, but delivering real change is really difficult. And, you know, the danger in all of these spaces is that you kind of get into almost a feel-good zone where people are feeling good about having a chance to have their say, feeling good about seeing strong and powerful women, you know, make statements and demand change, but actually drilling down and getting that change, I think, can be a different matter. And I think that there is a lot of room to have reform in the space of making it easier for women in their daily lives, whether that is through childcare, whether that is access to flexible work, and whether that is also in the space of the reform of the sexual assault allegation trials. You know, we've heard a lot in recent years about how traumatising that can be for women. I've been speaking to women in recent weeks who've spent years waiting for trials to occur, and then at the last minute, you know, the DPP decides for whatever reason not to proceed. Once again, there is just an incredibly heavy burden placed on women who make these allegations to basically endure shocking processes, and I think more needs to be done to look at how the court system deals with these matters.
Catherine, just finally to you before we bid you farewell and say goodbye to our viewers. Obviously, we are on the cusp of something, don't know what it is. It feels like a third wave of feminism to me very much. These women who have put out their powerful statement calling for a list of changes, is that putting genuine pressure on the politicians in our country?
Yeah, I think the continuation of the conversation, however that happens, does place pressure on the political class in Australia to look at these issues seriously. But Sam's exactly right when she says that, you know, that there are such profound structural changes that really need to be made in order to talk or walk the walk, I should say, on this, as well as talk the talk. So obviously, women showing up, women demanding to have their perspectives referenced and heard. You know, this new social media campaign by this group of prominent women, all of it keeps that in the public domain. All of that creates a feedback loop of pressure on the political class. But my word, we've got a hell of a way to go.
Thank you to both of you. As always, excellent panellists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Samantha Maiden and Catherine Murphy there. Well, that's the program. I'm Patricia Karvelas. I hope you've had a great International Women's Day. Bye for now.